The testimony that convicted Adolf Eichmann of Holocaust atrocities more than half a century ago has lost none of its power to chill the heart.
What happens when a powerful empire collapses overnight? When leaders who once commanded entire armies suddenly find themselves hunted as war criminals. In the final days of World War II, Adolf Hitler's most trusted generals faced a grim reality. Some were executed. Some took their own lives. Others tried to rewrite history and escape justice. But none of them walked away unchanged. So what happened to these German generals after World War II? Let's find out. First up, Friedrich Paulus, who had a reputation for being a disciplined-by-the-book officer. But when it came down to it, he did something no other German field marshal ever had done. He surrendered. By the winter of 1942 and 43, Stalingrad had turned into a death trap. The German Sixth Army was surrounded, starving and freezing to death. Hitler refused to allow a retreat, ordering Paulus to fight to the last man. Then on January 30th, 1943, Hitler promoted Paulus to field marshal. It wasn't a reward, it was a message. No German field marshal had ever been captured alive. Paulus was expected to take the honorable way out and die in battle or by suicide. But Paulus wasn't interested in dying for Hitler. The very next day, he surrendered to the Soviets. It was an enormous propaganda victory for Stalin. One of Germany's most senior generals was now sitting in Soviet custody, looking frail, exhausted, and utterly defeated. At first, Paulus refused to cooperate. He still believed in the Nazi cause, despite everything. But by 1944, after the failed attempt to assassinate Hitler, his views started to change. He realized Germany was finished, and he did something that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. He turned against Hitler. The Soviets wasted no time putting him to work. He joined the National Committee for a Free Germany, a group of captured German officers urging their fellow soldiers to surrender. If a field marshal was telling them the war was lost, maybe it was time to give up. After the war, he was called as a witness at the Nuremberg trials, testifying against his former colleagues. But switching sides didn't mean freedom. Instead of returning to West Germany, Paulus was sent to East Germany, where he lived under Soviet supervision for the rest of his life. Once a powerful commander, he spent his final years as a military historian, writing about the war he had once fought. He died in 1957, a man who had surrendered not just his army, but his loyalty, his reputation, and his place in history. Walter Model was Hitler's go-to general when things were falling apart. Nicknamed Hitler's fireman, he was known for pulling off last-minute defensives that kept the Allies and Soviets at bay. From the Eastern Front to the Battle of the Bulge, he had built a reputation for being unshakable under pressure. But by April 1945, there was no saving Germany. Trapped in the Ruhr pocket with his exhausted troops, Model faced the inevitable. The war was over, and he knew exactly what awaited high-ranking Nazi generals: trial, conviction, and likely execution. He had been one of Hitler's most loyal commanders, enforcing scorched earth policies and overseeing mass executions. The Allies wouldn't overlook that, but it wasn't just the enemy he feared. In the final moments of the war, Nazi propaganda had turned on its own generals, branding anyone who surrendered a traitor. Model had spent his life serving Hitler's vision, and he refused to let his legacy be one of defeat. He wouldn't give the Allies the satisfaction of putting him on trial, and he wouldn't give the Nazi leadership a reason to brand him a coward. On April 21, 1945, Model made his choice. He walked into the woods near Duisburg and shot himself. His last words to his aides were bitter, "And these are the men I trusted." After years of loyalty, he felt abandoned by the very regime he had fought for. His body wasn't found for weeks. By the time it was discovered, Germany had already surrendered. Some Nazi commanders were executed for their crimes. Others faced life behind bars. Then there was Albert Kesselring, a man who, despite a brutal war record, managed to walk free. Kesselring was one of Hitler's top Luftwaffe generals, responsible for air raids that leveled cities like Warsaw, Rotterdam, and London. But his most infamous actions came later, when he was put in charge of German forces in Italy. As resistance against the Nazi occupation grew, Kesselring cracked down with ruthless violence. His troops carried out mass executions, burned villages, and left a trail of terror across the country. One of the worst atrocities under his command was the Ardeatine massacre, where 335 Italian civilians were murdered as revenge for an attack on German soldiers. After the war, Kesselring was arrested and put on trial for war crimes. In 1947, a British military tribunal sentenced him to death. But then, almost immediately, high-ranking figures started lobbying to reduce his sentence. Some former British officials, impressed by his military skills, argued that he shouldn't be executed. Even Winston Churchill reportedly supported a commutation. The pressure worked. In 1948, his death sentence was downgraded to life in prison. But even life turned out to be temporary. In 1952, Kesselring was released early on medical grounds. Back in Germany, he didn't hide in shame. Instead, he became an outspoken public figure, writing memoirs and leading veteran organizations. By the time he died in 1960, Kesselring had spent far more time as a free man than as a prisoner. Then there's the general who tried to change history. Heinz Guderian wasn't just any German general. He was the brains behind Blitzkrieg, the lightning-fast tank strategy that helped Germany steamroll through Poland, France, and deep into the Soviet Union. His tactics reshaped modern warfare, making him one of the most famous military minds of World War II. But when Germany started losing, Guderian knew he had to switch sides fast. He had always clashed with Hitler, arguing against the dictator's disastrous battlefield decisions. By 1945, those arguments had gotten him sidelined. No longer in command, he was just another general watching Germany crumble. When the war ended, he didn't wait to be hunted down. He surrendered to the Americans. Unlike many of his fellow generals, Guderian was never charged with war crimes. Instead of facing trial, he spent his time helping the US military analyze Germany's battle strategies. He wasn't just a prisoner, he was a consultant, and he made sure to shape the story in his favor. While in captivity, he wrote Panzer Leader, a memoir that painted him as a brilliant, apolitical soldier, just a man doing his job, far removed from Nazi ideology. The book became hugely popular, especially in the West, where military leaders saw Guderian as a genius rather than a war criminal. His reputation as a strategist overshadowed the reality of destruction Blitzkrieg had caused. After his release in 1948, Guderian's second act was just as smooth. He advised NATO, helped rebuild West Germany's military, and lived comfortably as a respected military thinker. When he died in 1954, he wasn't remembered as a Nazi general. He was remembered as a pioneer of modern tank warfare. Guderian's story is a masterclass in reputation management. Next up, we've got Hermann Hoth, who wasn't just another German general. He was one of Hitler's top-ranked commanders, leading Blitzkrieg assaults and later trying to hold back the Red Army. But his reputation wasn't just built on battlefield tactics. His forces left a trail of war crimes, burning villages, executing civilians, and following Hitler's orders to wipe out Jews and communists in occupied Soviet territory. Hoth didn't pretend to be just a soldier following orders. He fully embraced Nazi ideology, openly telling his troops that their mission wasn't just about winning battles. It was about racial war. Under his command, entire communities were wiped out. After the war, there was no dodging responsibility. In 1948, a U.S. military tribunal sentenced him to 15 years in prison for war crimes. Considering how many of his fellow commanders ended up on the gallows, it could have been worse. But even that punishment wouldn't last. By the early 1950s, priorities had shifted. The Cold War was in full swing, and West Germany needed military expertise. Suddenly, the same generals who had been on trial for war crimes were seen as potential assets. After serving just 6 years, Hoth was released and allowed to quietly move on with his life. Instead of disappearing, he became a respected military historian, publishing books on strategy and tank warfare. He spent the rest of his life shaping the narrative of Germany's role in the war, downplaying the atrocities while highlighting battlefield successes. By the time he died in 1971, he was remembered more for his military tactics than for the war crimes committed under his command. Like many former Nazis, he had managed to slip through the cracks of history. Finally, there's the SS general who switched sides. Karl Wolff was no ordinary Nazi officer. As Heinrich Himmler's chief of staff, he was one of the highest-ranking members of the SS, with direct access to Hitler. He played a key role in the deportation of over 300,000 Jews to Treblinka and had blood on his hands. But unlike many of his fellow officers, Wolff wasn't willing to go down with the sinking ship. By 1945, it was clear that Nazi Germany was doomed. While the other SS leaders clung to Hitler's orders, Wolff decided it was time to save himself. He secretly reached out to the Allies, offering to negotiate the surrender of German forces in Italy. When the war ended, Wolff was arrested, but he never faced the same reckoning as other high-ranking Nazis. Thanks to his deal with the Allies, he dodged the Nuremberg trials and avoided a death sentence. Instead, he turned informant, testifying against his comrades and securing himself a relatively light punishment. For years, he managed to keep a low profile, but by the 1960s, new evidence surfaced proving just how deeply he had been involved in Nazi war crimes. In 1964, a German court finally convicted him, sentencing him to 15 years in prison. Even then, his luck didn't run out. He served only a fraction of his sentence before being quietly released in 1971. While other Nazi leaders spent their final years behind bars or in exile, Wolff lived a comfortable life in Germany, free from the consequences of his past. He died in 1984, having spent more time cutting deals than paying for his crimes. Some German generals went to their graves as war criminals. Others lived long enough to rewrite their own history, but none escaped the past. Their fates serve as a stark reminder that in war, even the most powerful figures can become fugitives overnight. And that justice, when it comes, is never evenly distributed. For more untold stories from history, check out our next video.